Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 2D6 Friday, episode 27. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. And this is going to be the episode in which I completely destroy my chances of winning the Fools of War, Kings of War tournament this weekend by shamelessly giving away all of my red-hot, sizzling winning strategies live on the air when potentially all of my opponents could be viewing. Yet the view count is going sky high right now, so I'm going to assume that all my potential opponents are going to be tuning in and scribbling down some pretty hardcore notes, although the lists have been public for a few days now. So anyone who's really that hardcore may have potentially already seen it. Right, we've got a few people in the chat already. I don't expect there to be too many people watching this because it is slightly unusual the time to be starting this 2D6 Friday episode. Usually I start a couple of hours ahead of now, but I do actually want to get some sleep tonight. Thankfully, the tournament this weekend, even though it's over 2 days, I don't have to get up ridiculously early because it is fairly close and it's only about half an hour from my house by car. So that's nice, and it's not a ridiculously early start time either. So I don't have to get up at 5 a.m. like I've had to for tournaments in the recent past. We've got Mickey Jenbert and Russell Higgins and Stu Rat commenting away so far. I would anticipate that the awareness of this show will spread over the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, and we'll start to get more viewers as time rolls on. But I'm not banking on having a huge number of people viewing. I'm sure this is going to be interesting for future research purposes as well, for anyone who's interested in Kings of War. There was actually a question posted on the Facebook group earlier about the Kings of War meta in my local area. So when I go through the lists and analyze them in excruciating detail, then we'll be able to draw some conclusions from that as well. Raphael Marge has just popped up into the chat there. Hello there. Okay, I'm going to, before I start the old screen share business and start to analyze, first of all, the tournament rules, and then my list, and then other people's lists. I'm just going to have a quick check on the old Facebook to see if there's anything urgent on there right now. Okay, it seems like we can get rolling. Okay, we've got a few viewers. Might as well start. Here we go. So the first thing we're going to look at is the rules pack. So there's nothing too crazy in here to report. I'm going to go through it a little bit. So there were actually 60 places available for this tournament, but it was a 2-dayer, which would say to me that it's going to be more difficult for people to justify their attendance. So I think there's only about 24 or so people there. It is quite difficult, though, to attend 2-day events if you don't live particularly close to it. If it was any further away, I would have trouble justifying it. So, pretty standard, 2,000 points, regular scenarios. Ooh, there's an interesting one. They're guaranteeing the number of tokens on push and ransack scenarios. Normally you have to roll a dice to decide how many tokens there are going to be. So getting everything a little bit uniform there. That's interesting. I hadn't actually looked at that before. 50 minutes on the chess clock each. And if you don't have a clock, then you will incur a penalty. So you don't want to be caught without a clock. There's no particular bonuses for painting your army very well, apart from potentially winning a prize. There's no tournament points for it, though. I think you do lose a couple of points, though, if you don't have a painted army at all. You don't get extra points for having, like, hand-painted banners or anything like that. Okay, so the scenarios are going to be invade, ransack, control, eliminate, push, and dominate. So invade, of course, trying to get to the other side of the table. Ransack being the one with the, I think that's the one with the objectives that all have different values. I'm sure someone will correct me if that's wrong. Control. Now, control used to be controlling sections of the table, but I think that was changed so that it's now controlling terrain pieces. Again, if I've got that one wrong, someone tell me. Eliminate, where you're trying to take out the most expensive units on the other side in close combat, preferably. Push is when you're trying to take tokens into the enemy half, and dominate is trying to control the center of the table. So pretty standard there. Hope I didn't mess up the screen share then, because I just moved the box. Nope, seems to be fine. So the scoring for this tournament, there have been a few different scoring systems thrown around, but this one is your standard tournament, as people will remember if they attended Warhammer tournaments in the old days. So 15 points for a win, 10 for a draw, 5 for a loss, and then your score is adjusted based on the difference of points that you killed. So if there's a difference of only 0 to 199 points, then it doesn't add or deduct anything from your score at all. And if you have it just a huge amount, if you kill everything and barely lose anything, then you'll be getting an extra 5 points and the opponent -5. So there is potential for 20-0, but I imagine it'll be very, very rare because it's so difficult to kill that much without losing anything in Kings of War. Raphael Marge says dinner, lunch is a very important rule. Yes, that's actually a scenario favourite of a lot of people. Dinner or lunch for you Southerners, it says there. Bonus painting scores. Let's see what it says here. So you'll be given bonus tournament points after game 6. Fully painted models will earn you 5 points. And an additional 5 points for fully based models and units. So they must be textured or sanded. So you can't just paint the base in one colour. That doesn't count. So I'm going to be fine there because my undead army is nicely sanded and flocked. Or static grassed, should I say. It's using all the Clash of Kings rules, of course, from the new expansion. And the Kings of War map pack. I have no idea what that's like, but I would imagine it's pretty standard across all the tournaments now. There's just an absolute ton of terrain on all the tables, which has affected my army selection, and we'll get to that in a minute. Hills are height 2, woods are height 4, pretty standard. If the player runs out of time, put the dice down, no further rolls for the rest of the game. So they can't resolve any combats after that. So even if you're in the process of rolling those dice to remove a unit, then you stop right there, and all charging units bounce back an inch, and then you can't do anything else for the rest of the game. You can't even regenerate, and you can't even pivot here. Some tournaments allow you to pivot when you run out of time, but this one does not. You just can't do anything whatsoever, apart from bounce away after failing to complete the combat. Beer and pizza night. Okay, I don't think we need to go over that. And interesting here, this tournament made an offer to ex-Warhammer players to come along and join in, and if they don't enjoy it, I think they get their money back. Minus food. Okay, so I don't think we need to look too much into the rules there. Raphael Marge, is there also a separate painting contest? There is a prize for best painted army. Let's see. Prizes for first, second, third, best painted, and best sports. So they are large trophies as well. I think he accidentally ordered trophies that were too large for this tournament. I've seen pictures of them. They are quite obscene. So let's dive onto the lists, shall we? So all the lists have been made public, and I've looked over some of them. So I may not look at every single one right now, but I'm going to look at some of them certainly. So we're going to start off with mine. Undead, of course. I'm using Undead for the next couple of tournaments at least, and then going back to the Goblins probably. So, changes from my previous list, quite a lot of changes, because I found that with tournaments using a lot of terrain now, the double zombie legion was just taking up too much space, I think. Still, at some point, I would like to try out a triple or a quadruple zombie legion, but for now, I think I should move away from it, because it just takes up such a huge amount of space on the table when there's so much terrain that they're always going to be hindered most of the time when they're charging, and that really limits their effectiveness, I think. And of course, some of the spells that have come in as well are beneficial against units that have high nerve and low defense. For example, Blood Boil would be a perfect example, and I think Soul Drain is also good against units with low defense. So the second legion is out. So a unit of Skeleton Warriors are still in there, just because I think for 90 points, it's a very efficient way of getting a decent nerve value there. 16, it's kind of the point where, if you look at the Wraiths, for example, with nerve 12, when you upgrade to a regiment of Wraiths, they go up to nerve 16, I think. The jump between 12 and 16 is quite significant, because if you have a nerve of 12, if you take 1 damage, then a good roll can remove you from the game. This is especially true for undead, because obviously a double 6 can't even waver undead units. So for these skeletons, for example, you have to put a few points of damage on them before you can even roll the dice. So just launching a lightning bolt at them isn't going to take them off with a lucky shot in the last turn to knock them off an objective. Whereas something with nerve 12, for example, even if it just does 1 damage, there's a chance with a good roll that you could remove them. So nerve 16, especially on something that can't be wavered, I think is quite a big deal. So sitting on objectives, maybe, if there's an important objective that they can just sit on for the whole game for only 90 points, just take them out of the equation and just fight the battle with 1,910 points instead. And also, if I need to put up a bit of a roadblock, because even something that's really hitty, that's going to do a lot of damage, it's difficult to guarantee taking out a skeleton regiment in 1 hit with that nerve 16, unless you're able to double charge them. So if you can match them up against any one powerful unit, even something that's going to be damaging them on 2s, it's going to be difficult to guarantee removing them, especially if you can keep them inspired. So I like the Skeleton Warrior unit, so I'm keeping one of those in there. Wraiths, I've only used them a small amount in the past, and I've never used 2 units of them in the same army list. So I've been furiously painting up my Wraiths to put into the units, because I had 2 Reaper Ghost models, 1 purple and 1 blue, so I got 1 box of Wraiths, and I've put them alongside them. So they're going to be 2 troops. And the main theme I've gone for with my army here is a lot of speed. I've still kept in the 1 zombie legion, and I'm trying out the Hammer of Measured Force on them, so they always damage on 4+. So it'll be situational, but it may actually encourage the enemy to send things at my zombies that they would ordinarily like to use to chaff up other units, because they don't want to be sending their really powerful defense 6 things towards a zombie legion, because they're not going to take out legion in 1 go. And then when it hits back, always wounding on 4, if it's something that relies on high defense, like, for example, enemy wraiths, they're not going to want to get stuck into this kind of action here, because a zombie legion would just chew through that, always wounding on a 4. And also, I'm not taking any Bane Chant in this list either. I'm trying to take a list that doesn't rely on Bane Chant whatsoever. Jonathan Falks says, Hammer of Measured Force on Zombie Legion, nasty. Yes, potentially. It depends what you come up against, though. If it comes up against an army of, let's say, Dwarf Berserkers that only have defense 4 anyway, then probably not ideal. But for only 20 points, it's not that big of a loss if there's a couple of games in the tournament where it's not that useful. So for the speed, I've got not only the 2 units of Wraiths, which are kind of fragile, I've also gone for Werewolves, which I've given the Brew of Strength, just because that Crushing Strength 1 is all right, but against the majority of things that they're going to be taking out, I would like to have just a bit more. Then we've got Soul Reavers with the Potion of the Caterpillar, because they do have a lot to lose if they become hindered, so removing the possibility of them becoming hindered on difficult terrain is quite important, I think, because the amount they have to lose is, of course, their Thunderous Charge 2, so they'd be down to Crushing 1, and hitting on 3+ is something that makes them really ridiculously powerful. So when they're not hindered, they can take a lot of things out in 1 hit. Even with a good roll, you can even take out some hordes in 1 go, with 20 attacks hitting on 3s, so you don't want them losing that power. Then I've gone for some Revenant Cavalry, so slightly less powerful cavalry, but a lot cheaper. And they, of course, lack the same number of attacks. They only hit on 4s, and I haven't given any item to them, because I don't want to make them too elite. They're kind of going to fill the role that perhaps the 2nd Zombie Legion would have filled in some circumstances. They could end up being in the centre of my army at times. So I've got more speed all across the board here, and even more speed down here because I've got a Revenant King on a horse and a Revenant King on an Undead Worm, which pretty standard. Blade of Slashing on him just because I've got points left over, and then also I've gone for Lycanis, who is like the werewolf hero. So he only inspires werewolves, so he's going to be obviously probably hanging around with the werewolves unless situation dictates that he doesn't want to, but inspiring them, you would suggest that he's going to be hanging out with them a lot. And he's got Crushing Strength 2, so really if he combo charges with the werewolves, then he's really just adding 5 to their attacks, because they also hit on 3s, and they will also have Crushing 2 because of the Brew of Strength. So if need be, he can always attack something else, though. Being nimble, speed 9, and of course height 2 as well, So if there's, for example, some kind of war machine lurking just behind enemy lines, there's a chance he'll be able to nimble his way around and attack it while the werewolves charge the bulk of the force. So he's useful there. And of course, the Revenant King on a horse can also do that kind of thing as well, being individual. He's just not quite as fast. And the King on the Worm, you wouldn't really want him going after war machines, one would suspect, because he's a lot of points. And also, you don't want him being stuck facing the wrong direction. You don't want Lycanis facing the wrong direction either, because he's not individual. But he's not quite as big a points investment as the Undead Worm. Revenant King is one you could just throw in kind of willy-nilly, and even if he ends up with his back to someone, then that's fine. So, I found in the last tournament that the zombie legions were kind of getting in the way of things, or sometimes getting in their own way by being too big. They would walk up behind one of my other units and they'd be kind of stuck there because the gap wouldn't be big enough for them to pass. And there's so much terrain on these tables that they were getting held up a lot in a couple of my games. If you saw the tournament report, then you will be familiar with that. So this is a much more speedy, compact force, just the one legion. Everything else apart from the legion and the skeletons, all the other units are fast, maneuverable, unless you count the necromancer. And I've gone for weakness on the necromancer as the spell, because I didn't want to take Bane Chance, I don't want to be relying on that. So I want weakness because my army is quite high defense. And if, for example, I come up against something like a giant, and if, for instance, I have to charge something in front of a giant, let's say, with, for example, my Soul Reaver cavalry, who are defense 6, then you can end up in a situation where the enemy has more drops than you. You can't kill everything in one go, so you're going to get countercharged by something. So potentially being countercharged by, let's say, a giant behind enemy lines, then the Necromancer would try and throw some weakness on it just to try and get rid of one of the crushing strengths from it, which would mean that in the case of the Soul Reavers, he would only be wounding Soul Reavers on 4s instead of 3s, which can make quite a big difference. So I think that's my thinking there. Quite high defense army, so throwing in the old weakness in there. Because really it's not going to make much difference throwing weakness on something that's about to attack zombies who only have defense 3 anyway. So really I'm going to be using it to protect some of my bigger, more expensive units, particularly in scenarios where that's important. And I haven't calculated whether this army has higher unit scores than my other list, because of course units aren't judged on their points in certain scenarios now. For example, dominate and invade, it's on the unit's strength. So hordes and legions are worth the most, then regiments, then troops, and monsters aren't worth that much. So any hero that's also, like for example Lycanis, he's a non-individual hero, so he'd be worth 1. Revenant King on Undead Worm would only be worth 1. So I imagine there'll be armies with a lot more drops, with a lot more potential to score, but I'm just hoping I can kill them. The one thing that strikes me about my army is that it's not quite as meaty as the previous one. I think I probably have lower total nerve because the other legion's gone. And some of the things I've brought in don't have the highest nerve, for example, wraiths. So you could argue it's kind of a glass cannon army. So I'm going to hit things and I'm going to kill them, because those werewolves and the Soul Reavers are going to hit like tanks. Hopefully the Revenant Cavalry will as well. They're going to kill things, but this army might not be set up to take the counterattack from the enemy once they've gone in and killed things. So I'm going to have to be clever with my maneuverable characters, for example, like Canis, the Revenant King, and the Wraiths, to make sure that I'm blocking any potentially incredibly dangerous countercharge that could be heading into my most expensive units. So it's going to have to be timed precision combo strikes synchronized to reduce the ferocity of the counterattack from the enemy. Because in most circumstances, I'm going to have more speed than them. So I think if I'm clever, then I can do quite well. But we shall see. So the first thing I'm going to look at as far as other people's armies, I'm going to have a look at the other undead armies first of all, and compare them to mine. I think there's one there, there's one there. And is there another one? Yes, there's another one down there. So let's have a look at all the undead armies first of all, see how they stack up to mine. So this has got a horde of revenants, which is something I don't have, which is kind of a big, meaty, tough to crack center. It's also got a zombie legion, also with the Hammer of Measured Force, so that's a popular experimental choice there. And the revenants are much more solid because they have a higher defense. And at nerve 25, they're definitely not to be, no, nerve 24, should I say, 25 attacks, they're definitely not to be sniffed at all. So, yes, and 3 troops of wraiths, which is, of course, more than I have. Zombie trolls and werewolves. Revenant King and Revenant King on Undead Worm are the same, and Lady Ilona. So, what does this list lack that mine has? Of course, cavalry is the big thing. I've got 2 cavalry units. This one doesn't have any. This has more of a slow core of the army with the revenants, the zombies, and the zombie trolls, which are slower than the majority of my units, but they are a bit more survivable than the majority of my units, probably. Zombie trolls, maybe only with defense 4, they're not hugely survivable, but they also dish out quite a lot of attacks as well. And of course, they're shambling, so they can be surged, which makes any unit potentially dangerous. But I don't think this army's really set up to do a huge amount of surging. It's only really got the Revenant King, and of course this Revenant King as well, who has been given the Spark Stone, which is a very interesting choice there. I'm not sure on what the thought process is of giving something like that to a character that you maybe want to get in combat. Maybe he's got another role in mind for this Revenant King on Undead Worm. Jonathan Volk says, Revenant King on Undead Worm is a great choice. Huge nerve, flying beastie for 235 points. Yes, please. Yes, I think it moves above the vampire on the Undead Pegasus just because it has the higher nerve value. Much more difficult to crack. And Lady Ilona, which is a good way of getting a defense 6 vampire in there, since vampire lords were put down to defense 5. So, yes, I'm sure that's the thinking behind taking her, getting a defense 6 individual vampire in there. So, it would be an interesting matchup if I came up against this, because we've got similar amounts of speed. This one's got slightly more flying units in it. I've, of course, got more cavalry. And Lady Ilona's no slouch herself at speed 8. So I think that would be a very interesting matchup. And I believe that this particular player has more experience with Undead than I do. And I know from personal experience that he's very good at setting up combo charges. So I would imagine he's going to do quite well with this. It looks like quite a dangerous list to me. Those 3 units of Wraiths, they're definitely not to be sniffed at. One thing I would say, let's just check something. So Lady Ilona, of course, has Surge as well. So he has 3 lots of Surge, but you could argue that 2 of them he wouldn't want to be using that much. More likely he would want these 2 in combat whenever possible. So 1 Surge that he wants to be using, and units that would like to benefit from Surge. There are quite a lot of them, actually. So the Revenant Horde, all those Wraiths would love to be Surged because they're so fast that you can move them into an enemy flank and they fly, so you could then pivot them and then surge them into a flank. So only being able to do that with 1 unit at a time, potentially. It depends. It'd be interesting to see how he handles this army and what he does with these heroes. Whether he's going to use the Surge to its full potential, because he's also got the Zombie Trolls as well, so he's got a lot of shambling units in here. Much more shambling than I have in my list, it has to be said. Because I've also got the Soul Reavers. He's really just got the Werewolves as a non-shambling unit, I think. Apart from the heroes, obviously. So, very interesting. Let's have a look at one of the other Undead armies. Okay, here's another one. So, Skeleton Warrior units. Yep, I'm a big fan of them. Skeleton regiments. High nerve, low cost. Excellent choice. Revenants. 2 troops of Revenants with the crushing strength and only down to defense 4. Interesting. So they're kind of little mini hammer units, really. So perhaps behind the lines, waiting to go in and plug gaps and lead a counter charge, because they can dish out some decent damage there. Zombie Trolls. Am I going to be the only one with no Zombie Trolls? Revenant Cavalry, 2 regiments, Brew of Strength and the Potion of the Caterpillar. Brew of Strength is a good choice on these guys, of course, because they're relying on Thunderous Charge, so on some occasions they're not going to be able to benefit from Thunderous Charge. So giving them that Brew of Strength is handy, and the Potion of the Caterpillar on Cavalry, of course, very handy to stop them being hindered. 3 Revenant Kings on Undead Worms, one of them flying. A very, very interesting choice, because they have such high nerve that these guys are really difficult to kill. It's kind of, I look at them the same way I would look at a giant here. So let's compare them to a giant, shall we? Because they're only, with the upgrades he's put on them, well, this one's in fact the same price as a giant, so let's just directly compare it. So speed 7, same as a giant, same melee stat, same defense. Attacks, a giant on average is going to get around about that amount, but sometimes gets higher, sometimes gets lower. The nerve, I think a giant's 17, 19. They both have Crushing Strength 3. This guy's Inspiring, of course, and has Life Leech and Surge, but a giant has Fury, Brutal, and Strider. So, interesting. The fact they have Inspiring, of course, makes them much more valuable. Other than that, they're slightly below giant level in other aspects. The flying one, of course, is where it's at, though, because it's just not that expensive at all to have a flying one of these. I don't know why more of his aren't flying here. Maybe he just couldn't spare any more points, because he is putting a lot of points into heroes here, because he's also got a Cursed Pharaoh with the Wings of Honeymaze, another flying character. Wow. So he really wants to get around the place, and Mortibrus the Necromancer is also in there. He's not cheap for a Necromancer. So what's he going to be relying on? Well, he's stealthy, and I think he does something else. He puts stealthy, I think, on units around him. So shooting lists won't like that. If he's walking up with, let's see, I'm not sure. You would imagine he's going to be hanging around with the Skeletons and the Revenants, because they're quite slow. Just like him. The Revenant Cavalry, even though they're faster, they're not, they are a shambling unit, I should say. So they're not going to be going that far ahead, and the same for the Zombie Trolls. So he could probably keep that big block permanently stealthy, I think, with Mortibrus. So that must be a strategy there. Yeah, just kind of march this huge veil of undead towards the enemy, hopefully unscathed by shooting. And there are some ferocious shooting lists in this tournament. I have had a quick glance and seen 1 or 2 of them. So that's very interesting. That's not a huge amount of units. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 units. So it's about the same as me, but he's put about half his points into heroes here. So that's a very interesting move. It's a bold move, but it's kind of misleading to say that he's put that much into heroes, because these 3 are very fighty heroes. So, there's not much chance of his army being out of Inspiring range, is one thing I would say, because these guys are going to be right up there in the fight, you would imagine. Very interesting. So that's quite a different list. And then the other undead list is for the spare player. And wow, this has a lot of wraiths. Okay, so Horde of Revenants, first of all, with the Brew of Strength. So rather than paying to give them Crushing Strength 1 and dropping their defense, he's just paid to give them the Brew of Strength, because he wants the best of both worlds there. Then we've got 4 units of Wraiths, 2 troops, 2 regiments. Now, what I was saying earlier, I wasn't entirely sold on the idea of regiments of Wraiths, because the stats don't improve that much for the extra point investment. But as I was saying, the difference between 12 nerve and 16 nerve, especially on a defense 6 unit, is potentially insane. Because like I was saying, just 1 damage and a lucky roll, you could potentially get rid of this unit if it's a troop. But with a regiment, it's difficult to rack up 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 damage on a defense 6 unit. You have to actually put something significant into doing that, or just drop a rock on it. So, and 1 regiment with the Brew of Haste, so you've got a speed 11 unit of Wraiths there. So, you would imagine, interesting, because one thing about Wraiths, because they're speed 10, sometimes if you put them behind the right unit, behind in your own lines, I should say, then you can jump them over the enemy when they come in to attack your lines, and then turn them around and then surge into the rear of the unit. But you often don't have enough space for that with 10 inches, depending which units you have in front of you. Especially if you're behind a horde, it's difficult to do that. So most of the time you're going to be going into the flank of enemies. So really putting Brew of Haste on a flying unit, it will just give you, it's like an arms race, isn't it, with speed. So you kind of have the edge in the speed war. So if the enemy has a flyer, you can have a greater threat range than them with a potential 22-inch charge when theirs will only be 20. So you've got one unit that could act as a real deterrent to enemy flyers there, so that's interesting. Zombie Legion, Brew of Sharpness, yep, very good choice. I take that quite a lot. I was just trying out the Hammer of Measured Force because this is very expensive and wanted to give something cheaper a go, but not to be sniffed at. Soul Reaver Cavalry with Potion of the Caterpillar, exactly the same as mine. Undead Army Standard Bearer with the Loot for Bane chanting people up. Let's see who's going to benefit from Bane chanting this army. The Wraiths wouldn't mind a bit of it, but they don't have that many attacks, so you'd imagine mainly the zombies are going to get Bane chanted by the Undead Army Standard Bearer, who's also going to be hanging around to inspire them. So on 40 attacks, they're now hitting on 4s because of the Brew of Sharpness, so you're going to be getting 20 hits, and then putting Bane Chant on them as well, because the Necromancer also has Bane Chant. So yeah, Bane chanting them up is going to be a good move. They're going to be a very, very dangerous unit there. With all that Bane Chant, you would imagine that that unit is pretty much most of the game going to have Crushing Strength 1, and with that Brew of Sharpness as well. Very, very dangerous proposition going into that Legion there. Then Morgoth the Faceless. So I don't know which unit he has put the Touch of Darkness on to give them regeneration 5+, but putting that on a Zombie Legion would be quite insane. So yeah, I think the enemy would just be best off ignoring that unit then. A Zombie Legion with regeneration is quite an insane prospect. Or whether he puts it on that unit or not, I don't know, but I think it's a good choice. Again, not many units. How many drops has he got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the lowest of all the undead armies. So where have all these points gone? Well, Wraiths are not cheap. Zombie Legion with a very expensive item. Soul Reavers are expensive. And Morgoth the Faceless is nearly 300 points. So that's where all the points went. What's going on in the chat? Some people are intoxicated, apparently. Apparently Dreddy is slightly intoxicated after watching hockey, like some kind of sports hooligan. Tabletop Minions' liver is nearly back to normal after Adepticon, presumably. Let's see, is anyone actually talking about Kings of War in there? I'm sure there are some Kings of War related comments. They've just been lost in the mass of intoxication chat at the moment. So, there's the undead, and the common theme, I think, Zombie Legion, very common. I like to think I helped popularize it by taking 2 of them to multiple tournaments. Wraiths, very, very common as well, just because it's not a lot of points to pay for such a fast unit with such high defense. So, let's see, what else? There's quite a lot of differences between all the lists as well, though. All of them are very different, really, in many ways. There are just a few common units to all of them. The character choices are all very different, apart from the Revenant King setup is quite similar on mine and one of the other lists. So, there's quite a lot of speed across those lists as well. What I want to look at now, I want to look at the list that I'm going to be playing against in round 1. So, it's Orcs, and you may have recognized the name I was clicking on there. Yep, this is my regular opponent. We always seem to draw each other in round 1 of tournaments. I don't know why it is, but it always happens. However, I think I'm unbeaten against him in Kings of War tournaments. He did beat me at the only Dead Zone tournament we went to, and our friendly games have a much more even spread of results, but I believe I'm undefeated against him in Kings of War tournaments. So we'll see if I can keep that going, but I'm going to look at this list now and see how I think I stack up against it. So, Orcs. Now, the changes made to the Orcs, a lot of their units have gained Fury, but looking down here, I can't see too many units with Fury. So interesting. He's gone for 3 Axe units, 2 regiments, and a Horde. So some nice crushing strength there right off the bat, and high defense as well. So against my army, then they kind of match up well, but it's also the kind of unit I would like to face, because I like people to be spending money, or spending points, should I say, on high defense when I'm going to be knocking that down a lot with my large amount of crushing strength and thunderous charge I have in my list. And his Crushing Strength 1 is also going to be quite handy at taking down my high defense list. So it could be a bit of a bloodbath if I get into it with these guys. I will have the speed edge on these units, of course. Orklings are so annoying to take down because you just have to put something into killing them. You can't throw something with a tiny number of attacks in there and hope it'll kill them in one go, because it won't. And for only 90 points, they're similar to the Skeleton Warrior Regiment, except they have a lot more attacks. So if you roll well with them, you can potentially do a lot of damage with Orklings. Trolls, I know them well from using them in my Goblin army. Dwarven Ale, the standard item for Trolls, because of that big gap between Waver and Rout. So potentially they're going to become wavered quite a lot. So you want that Dwarven Ale to mitigate the downside of that. 50% chance of just ignoring it, which is nice. So when I look at the nerve value of Trolls as well, that's the kind of unit that my powerful units are going to struggle to take out in one go. So it would have to be a combo charge or a flank with something really powerful. Just sending the werewolves or something into the front of a troll unit wouldn't be good news. I wouldn't be able to take them out in one go. Then Gore Riders, 3 regiments of cavalry, one with the Brew of Haste. So he's got some speed 9 cavalry there. Another one with the Caterpillar Potions, so they're not going to lose their Thunderous Charge. And another one with the Brew of Courage, so they're more difficult to take out. So again, lots of Crushing Strength here. Crushing Strength 2 on the Trolls, Crushing Strength 1 on all these Gore Rider units. So even if I manage to get them hindered or remove their Thunderous Charge by striking first, then when they strike back, they're always going to have that Thunderous Charge 1 at least, which is going to be handy against my high defense units. Then Crudger on Slasher. So let's see. Let's compare him to the Revenant King and Undead Worm, shall we? So speed the same. Melee stats, this guy's slightly better. Defense 5 the same. Attacks, this guy's got slightly more. Nerve, this guy's is lower. He's got Fury as well, which is nice, but of course Undead wouldn't need that anyway. Crushing Strength 3, so that's the same. And this one is quite a bit more expensive. This one's nearly 300 points, and the other one is about, I think this one is about that much without the extra 50 points for making it flying. So this is arguably slightly better, but the Revenant King and Undead Worm is cheaper. So even match up there. Godspeaker for his casting, healing, Fireball 9, quite handy. He's taken the weakness spell as well. And Gakamak, who is very, very scary, because he has Crushing Strength 3, 7 attacks. He hits on a 2+, and he has Vicious. So he hits on a 2+. He's probably going to be damaging on a 2+, re-rolling 1s. He has very inspiring as well. So he's about, with the Gore, he's 240 points. That, I don't even think that's expensive for him. So I would be concerned about him. So as far as speed go, I'm going to have the speed edge in this game 1 matchup. I've got more fast units than he has, but he's no slouch either. He's got a flyer, he's got a speed 9 unit of cavalry, he's got a couple of speed 8 units. Trolls aren't particularly slow, and Gakamak, of course, is speed 8 as well. So it's going to be interesting because the meat of his army is more significant than mine. So I've only really got the Zombie Legion, who are the meaty bulk, the center of the army, whereas he's got these 3 units that he could just stick in the middle, and they can hold for a little while with their defense, and their nerve is quite high. So, interesting. How many units has he got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I think that's the same as me. So I think it's going to be a very interesting round 1 matchup. If anyone has any comments on that. Andrew Gilbert says, Gakamak in the Orc list, he is good. Yes, he is. Joshua Holt says, first time catching you live, just wanted to say I enjoy your show. Well, thank you very much. I aim to please. I also aim to give away all my battle tactics, apparently. Let's see. Tabletop Minions. Gakamak is an awesome name. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, there's an ogre character with a very similar name in the Kings of War book. He's called something like Grokama Gorok or something, and it's very easy to get them mixed up. So when they were writing the names for the characters in the Kings of War book, they really should have been a bit more creative and used some different consonants, I would say. Any other comments? Jonathan Volks is calling shenanigans on the draw. Yes, anytime you get drawn against the same person in like 50% of tournaments, there's something shifty going on, definitely. So can I keep my undefeated record intact against this army? I'm confident because I have the speed edge, but on the other hand, I'm also using an undead list, the like of which I've never used before. I've never used anything remotely similar to the one I'm taking. So I may discover things in game one that I didn't know. So I could get caught off guard there. I've played against variations of this orc list multiple times, so I think I'll know what to expect from them. I just don't know what to expect from my own list. And obviously, more times I play with the likes of wraiths, the more skilled I'll become maneuvering them into position. I think I'm fairly good at spotting how to position units. And I'm not exactly like the ultimate chess master. I'm sure there are some players out there that are better than me at anticipating what people are going to do and positioning around it. But I think I'm decent at that. So I think with my speed edge, I think I can do this. I think. Of course, I'm not sure my army can stand up once it delivers the first blow and kills his front line of units, which is likely to be orclings, let's say maybe trolls, maybe I can get rid of them. But the countercharge from these orcs isn't going to be quite significant with all the crushing strength and 25 attacks from the horde. So it's going to be a pretty solid countercharge he's got there. And his Gore Riders are definitely not to be underestimated as well. They do get in their own way sometimes if he has 3 units, which he does here. So we'll see about that. And of course, I'm concerned about Gakamak. Right then, let's look at something else. So we're seeing quite a lot of speed in the list so far. What shall we look at now? Let's look at some of the well-known big hitters in the community, shall we? So let's look at this Varangur army. Okay, so I'm not greatly familiar with the Varangur in general, but I'll try to give you my assessment based on what I can see here. So I'm going to have a look what Iron Resolve does first of all, because I can't actually remember. Iron Resolve, the unit is steady. If this unit is steady as a result of a nerve test, it regains 1 point of damage previously suffered. Right, so that's okay. It's kind of like a life leech, but without having to attack people. So that's pretty cool. So the Fallen, large infantry, fairly standard, but their nerve looks quite high. If I compare them to something like Trolls, they're faster. They have better melee. 18 attacks is pretty damn good. High nerve, crushing strength 1 only though. But they are nimble. So yeah, they're more like werewolves, if anything. Quite similar to werewolves, not quite as fast. Interesting. Tundra Wolves, so these will be little cheap chaff units, 110 points, low nerve, speed 9 though, and they do have Thunderous Charge 1, so you can't just ignore them. Horse Raiders, so they're your pretty standard cavalry there, but they do have ranged attacks as well, which is an interesting one, because they can just kind of dance around you, because they are nimble. So he's going to be moving and shooting, presumably there. Goblin Fleabag's quite similar, but a little bit faster. Jonathan Falk says, Fallen are supercharged werewolves, but slower, ironically. Yes, that's how they appear. Devourer. So he's got 2 Devourer monsters. So they're similar in points to a giant. So let's see how they stack up to that. Attacks, they have more than the average giant number of attacks. Only crushing strength 1, though. So overall, it's like they've got a lot of crushing strength across the board, but it's lower than some of the other armies. Let's see. Is that Magus Conclave? So it's a war engine, and they're elite. So Blast D3, kind of like a bolt thrower then, piercing 2, range 36, attacks 2. So with elite, they'll be re-rolling 1s to hit, so they're going to get a couple of hits probably. You would imagine them to get at least 2 or 3 hits a turn between these two. So that's going to be interesting at long range. Magus. Right, pretty standard caster. And Skald. So he's on a mount, running around with the Loot of Insatiable Darkness. Let's see, anything special about him? Well, he's only got 1 attack. Oh, 2 of them. So I'd imagine that's just their standard bearer, pretty much. So I've only ever faced Varangur once or twice, I think. Maybe only once, and I think I've won. So maybe I haven't had the best sample of playing against them. because I've heard nasty things about them sometimes. So it remains to be seen whether they can do well here. I don't think he's played that many times with this army. But of course, when you see that name there, you know he's going to be, once he gets the list down in his head and gets some practice in, he's going to be the ultimate beast with it, like he is with everything. Jonathan Falk says, you did win, it was versus me. Yes, I remember it well, defeating that purple Varangur horde, crushing them underfoot. So, interesting one here. Again, we're seeing a lot of speed. If you want to know what the meta is for Kings of War, speed 7 or above. Lots of speed 8 and 9. Let's have a look. Who else is a well-known big hitter or who has won a tournament recently? Let's look at this one here because he's won some tournaments lately. Half man, half dark horse. Yes, he is. So let's just have a quick scan down and look at the speed first of all. 6, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 9, 10, and there's another 10. So again, lots and lots of speed. So in a game where there is no random element to the charge distances, like Kings of War, and you can pre-measure everything, being faster than the enemy is a big edge that you can have on them. If you're getting in the first hit all the time, there are certain units and certain armies that can't deal with that very well. Obviously, there are some ways of countering it. If you have such a meaty but slow army that just getting the first hit in on you doesn't slow you down in the slightest, and it just won't kill you in one go. And then when you hit back against the faster, more delicate units. So let's have a look at, this is the Forces of Nature. I don't have a huge amount of experience playing them either. I think I've played them at least once, and maybe as allies a couple of times as well. Definitely played them at least once or twice, though. Bazooka J Rambo, hello, didn't realise the show was early. Yes, it has to be early because I need some sleep tonight on the eve of a 2-day tournament. So, let's have a look. Forest Shamblers. So, shambling, does he have anyone to surge them around? Let's see. Yes, he's got the Tree Herder with Surge there. Often you see people take these shambling units and then you look down and you don't see any Surge characters, which I always find questionable because that's just, you're taking a tool out of your arsenal. That Surge is just so useful when the enemy think they're safe, but they're not. Let's have a quick look at some of these units. So, Crushing Strength and Thunderous Charge. Crushing Strength. Yes, lots of things with lots of Crushing Strength. I'm seeing very little without Crushing Strength here. So again, that's also the meta. And as far as defense goes on this army, that's where it's been, I wouldn't necessarily say let down, but it's not as high as some of the other armies we've looked at because you see we've got some defense 4, defense 3 unit there. Lots of defense 4. 4 is the most common defense in this army. There are a few higher ones here with the characters and monsters low down. But overall, the bulk of the army is only defense 4. So with their speed, likely to hit first. If you hit them back, maybe you can do some serious damage, though. They're decent nerve, not obscenely high with that low defense. So let's say, for example, you had these 2 units of Centaur Bray Striders charging into, for example, a Zombie Legion. Then, they've only got 12 attacks each. So you're not going to be doing enough with both of these combined to take out a Zombie Legion in one go. And then when they hit back, what would a Zombie Legion do against this? So let's assume it's a Zombie Legion in the spare player list that hit on 4s. So they're going to be getting 20 hits on them. Their defense 4, let's assume they're Bane Chanted to defense 3, basically, when they're being hit. So these guys could potentially drop in one go. Potentially, but it's not a guarantee by any means. Yeah, if their nerve was a little bit lower, I'd be more concerned for them. But I think it's just high enough that you could easily see them getting wavered, but then they've got more people. They've got another unit backing them up there. So, interesting. They have a relatively small number of attacks on some of these units here, like a regiment with only 12. That's not a lot for a cavalry unit, really, is it? The large cavalry with 18 attacks is more like it, though. Right. Not going to look too much more at these because I'm not an expert in the forces of nature, but I think we've got a taste there. So just looking down for names of other well-known big hits as well. Let's look at Mr. Rules Committee himself. What's he got? Abyssal Dwarves. So Abyssal Dwarves are not commonly seen. I did play them at a tournament recently and crushed them into the ground. I think I've only played them twice, probably. The first time I played them, I think, was a draw, actually, but I don't think I've ever lost to Abyssal Dwarves. So we'll see what kind of list he's got here. So a big horde of black souls with the Brew of Strength. Brew of Strength and Vicious, so that's going to be nasty to deal with. Defense 5, good nerve. So they're all right, pretty standard. Immortal Guard. Is that 2 regiments, is that? 2 regiments of Immortal Guard. Nerve 17, good for a regiment of infantry. I think doesn't most of that stuff have Vicious? Yeah, a lot of it does. So they're melee 3+. What's he done here? Exchange shields for 2-handed weapons. So they get crushing strength 1. All right, so we're seeing lots of crushing strength. We're seeing it there, we're seeing it there and there. Slave Orcs, they have crushing strength as well. Again, it's all about that crushing strength. Gargoyles for fast chaff. We haven't seen much speed yet, though. Maybe it's coming now. Abyssal Half-Breeds, crushing strength, and Thunderous Charge. We go down. Abyssal Grotesques. Yeah, we're getting a bit more speed in here. So they, of course, have extra crushing strength as well, and Thunderous Charge. And looking at the defense, another fairly low defense army for the bulk of it, because he's reduced the defense on these units to 4+, so that's lowered the average quite a bit. Heavy mortars. So to compare this to something like the Goblin Rock Thrower, so this has a higher potential number of hits because it's got D6 plus 4, and it has Vicious as well. So it's only 1 attack though, and hitting on 5, but with 2 of them, you would be expecting to get a few hits over the course of the game, and with D6 plus 4 hits, that's going to be quite significant. Because even if you roll a 1, that's still a decent number of hits to be landing. It's not like a bolt thrower where it's just a straight D3 and you can end up with just 1 hit. The minimum you're getting here is 5. So for 120 points, that doesn't sound bad at all. Slave Driver, just your standard characters. And then Basusu the Vile. So he's an infantry hero as well. What's so special about him? Well, he flies. That's what's special about him. Crushing strength 2, inspiring to gargoyles only. So he's like a gargoyle character then. So he's got 8 attacks. He's kind of vampire-like. He's very similar to a vampire, actually. If we compare him, if like a flying vampire, melee 3+, that's the same. Defense, number of attacks. Yeah, he is quite vampire-like. Very, very potent, this guy. So that's quite scary. Not as much speed as we've seen in some of the other lists, but it's certainly not lacking in fast units. So I'd be interested to see how that does. But will the army be finished in time? Yes, that's a good point, because I think he was just working on it recently. I saw a picture of a load of blank trays, blank multi-bases. So it must be the ultimate speed painting project he's doing here. Mutant Mastiffs are rather good, are they? Let's see. So 15 points. I think that's more than a regular Throwing Mastiff. Let's see what it actually does. So Mutated Throwing Mastiff. Okay, that's a lot of text. So the same as Dwarven Throwing Mastiffs, except they re-roll failed rolls to damage against all enemies. Okay, so the way they work is that you just keep attacking with the dog until it fails, and then it stops. So being able to re-roll failed rolls to damage makes it more likely to keep going. So that's quite tasty. Putting it on slow units, of course, means that if you're having to position yourself within someone else's charge range but outside of yours, then you can just lob things at them. Because you're not going to be choosing when to charge when you're only a speed 4 unit, really. Let's be realistic now. Okay, let's see. Who else? Aha. So this guy's won a tournament or 2 recently. Let's refresh that so it actually works. There we go. So City Militia with the Sparkstone. Now, I'm just going to check. I'm pretty sure the Sparkstone is the one that you just throw at someone and you can potentially... Yeah, roll single dice to hit, needing 4+ to hit, and if it hits, then that unit is disordered. Okay, so you can stop people shooting, or you can stop them having their thunderous charge just by lobbing that at them. So yeah, that's an interesting one. If he thinks they're about to be charged by some heavy cavalry, just lob that at them. 50-50 chance, getting rid of their thunderous charge. You can see that being decent. Dogs of War, Brew of Strength with Ensnare and Phalanx. Right, I would not be wanting to charge my cavalry into them. Definitely not. So they're pretty solid. Honor Guard, which are large cavalry. These are quite monstrous. Very, very beastly indeed. Look at that, 24 attacks. Crushing 1, Thunderous 2. So you don't want to be giving them the opportunity to charge you unhindered. You want to be hitting them first, really, to get rid of that Thunderous 2. Because melee 3+ as well with 24 attacks. That is ridiculous. That's like better than Soul Reavers when they hit you full on. But they're a little bit slower. And of course, they're relying more on Thunderous Charge, and there are more ways to negate that than Crushing Strength. So it's the same as the Soul Reavers, really, with the Crushing Strength 1 and Thunderous Charge 2. But again, compared to certain other units, then those two units are two that are relying very much on their Thunderous Charge successfully getting off. So these ones are Potion of the Caterpillared up, so it's going to be harder to hinder them. But the fact that these are slightly slower than a lot of cavalry units that have similar stats suggests that I'd be able to throw something at them. Let's say a Revenant King on a horse. You throw him into a unit like this, do a couple of damage on them maybe at most, but then you're taking away their Thunderous Charge and just blocking them off while you're fighting somewhere else. Christopher Lang says that he works on War Machines, Monsters and Heroes. Yeah, so most of the time you would probably want to throw it as a hero, I would imagine, to stop them casting certain essential spells. Let's see, the other one with Wine of Elvenkind. Now, I always forget what that does, so I'm just going to have a quick look here. Nimble, okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense that you would put Nimble on a unit like this. That's going to make them more difficult to block. Let's see, Halfling Volley Gun. Right, so imagine these are, I think these are basically the same as the Dwarf Organ Gun, so 15 attacks, but they only hit on 5s. Piercing 2, range 24. So you're not being shot at in the first turn with these things, unless you go first. So coming up against this army, you'd probably let them go first, so he's going to have one less turn of shooting with his volley guns. It depends on the scenario and other factors, though. So they're pretty solid. Does he have a Master Engineer to give them elite? Let's see. No, he does not. He obviously didn't have the spare points. So that's an interesting choice. Usually when you see someone invest that much in a triple War Machine combo like that, they would normally also take the character that grants a bonus to them and then stick them all next to each other. But not in this case. Interesting. Halfling Iron Beast. D6 plus 15 attacks. That's quite a lot. I always find it funny when it's got like D6 plus 15, because the random element is such a small proportion of the overall number of attacks. It seems almost silly to have it. So it also has a breath attack, crushing strength 2. So it's similar to the Dwarf Steel Behemoth. I'm not sure if it's slightly worse, but decent nerve, and of course defense 6. That's what makes it difficult to crack. But the prevalence of crushing strength we've seen in the lists so far would suggest that people are prepared to deal with things like that. Winged, monstrous character as well. You're going to see a lot of these that aren't dragons. So this is similar in points to the Revenant King on Undead Worm. Let's see how it stacks up. Better melee, less attacks, lower nerve. It has Iron Resolve, less crushing strength. It has heal as well, and very inspiring, which can be quite a big deal. Very inspiring is a very, very useful spell, and the Army Standard Bearer is very inspiring as well. So that must be a League of Rordia thing to have very inspiring characters. And he's got the Loot of Insatiable Darkness for Bane Chant. So things like Honor Guard, if they lose their Thunderous Charge, they'd be relying on getting some nice extra crushing strength from Bane Chant on them. And these two units could certainly benefit from it with their large numbers of attacks especially, let's see, they've got crushing 1, so have they, because the brew of strength. So yeah, lots of crushing strength. That's what we're seeing. If you want to know what the meta is, it's speed and crushing strength. This army's not that fast, though. Got a couple of fast units there and 1 flying character, but for the most part, it's pretty slow. Although it's not that essential if he's just going to be sitting there gunning people down with his volley guns. Okay, what shall we look at next? Let's see who else has got a familiar name. Let's just pick someone at random, actually, now. Let's see what army would be interesting to look at. Let's have a look at a goblin list, because I'm, of course, familiar with goblins, so I'll be able to offer some expert insight here. So, 2 spitter hordes, 1 with the heart-seeking chant, which is the piercing. I'm just going to check I've got that right, though. Yes, piercing 1. So that's going to be relatively scary. 2 troll hordes, fleabag sniffs, there's a lot of shooting here. 3 war trombones, 2 big rock throwers. A flagget who's going to be bane chanting people. But who is he going to be bane chanting with that? That's the interesting thing. Because as far as... surely he's not going to use it to be bane chanting spitters, because you need 2 successes for it. So it's going to be quite difficult. Same goes for the whiz. Yeah, there's a lot of bane chant in this army, and I'm not sure it's always going to be necessary. But let's see. So 2 mincers, 2 giants. Giants, it's not really essential to be bane chanting them. Mincers, there are occasions where you're going to be losing all that thunderous charge, so maybe you'd want to bane chant them sometimes. Trolls have already got crushing 2, so against a lot of enemies, it would be kind of wasted to bane chant them. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of high defense in this tournament, so maybe bane chanting at the trolls is a strategy there. And yeah, maybe try and bane chant the war trombones, but more often than not, you're going to fail. So interesting choice. The whiz is on a fleabag, and he also has blood boil and the boots of levitation. I think the boots of levitation allow you to cast a spell. Is it even when moving at the double? Let's see. Can advance and then shoot as if it had halted. It can also move at the double and shoot as if it had advanced. Right, so yeah, it can move at the double. So that guy can move 20 inches and then still cast spells. So that is... I can see how that plays into this army very well. Look at the amount of shooting there is. So this guy, with his blood boil, moves 20 inches across the table, staring at the side of a huge big unit, let's say a zombie legion, for example. He then starts peppering them with 40 shots from the spitters, doing mass damage on them, dropping rocks on their heads perhaps, and then racks up, let's say, 15 damage onto that unit. Then, of course, he has blood boil, which would allow him to roll 15 dice to attack the unit with blood boil then. So, I'm not sure whether having all these upgrades on this character, though, would mean he'd just throw it away willy-nilly. He's got another one with Bane Chant there as well. Interesting. I'd like to see this army in action to see how he uses this wizard more than anything. Where he would deploy this guy. Very interesting. And he's got quite a lot of beef when you actually get to the army. You think it looks like a gun line, but then 2 troll hordes, 2 giants, and 2 mincers when you get there. So you can't just go in willy-nilly and expect once you close the distance on the gun line, he's just going to be toast. Because there is some significant meat to be found at the center of this particular sandwich. It may be the burger in the center is certainly meaty, even though the bread on either side looks quite weak. And with the sesame seeds of shooting attacks... Okay, I'm going to drop that now. It's not going anywhere. So, lots of shooting, lots of meat. Fleabag Rider Sniffs are... I've never used them to their full potential, but they do have potential because of being nimble and being able to shoot with that 10-inch move, so just running around, shooting people and staying out of range. So, yeah, this looks very, very solid. I wouldn't like to walk my slower armies towards this. How my undead army would do against it, I'm not sure. I think it would possibly come down to whether these big rocks are successful. So I've got a lot of flying stuff, though, and a lot of speed 9 as well. So I think I could close the distance pretty fast. But I wouldn't like to just run headlong into this army with half of mine when I'm coming up against all those trolls and giants. I think this is going to be a really tough army. I think this is going to do well. I think he's used his points very wisely here. Wouldn't like to come up against this. I think it'd be quite a tricky one. Or if I were to come up against this, I would like it to be in a scenario that would encourage some form of play that would be not very suitable for this army. So he's got a lot of shooting, so maybe something that encourages him to move across the table towards me. So it would depend on perhaps the position of objectives and so on. Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. If I were to come up against this, maybe I would just stack all the objectives up on one side of the table as much as possible. And then hope to get that side so he has to come towards me. Or if I have to go towards him, that's what I would have had to do anyway, because he's got the shooting. So, interesting. Okay, let's look at another one. Well, there's an interesting one. Let's look at Ratkin plus Abyssals, because I've not seen that combo before. So for the Fury, Stealthy, and Snare, just little annoying units, really, with lots of attacks, though. So 20 attacks from a troop is a lot. That's a significant number of attacks. Abyssal Guard, Fury as well, dropping the shields to get the two-handed weapons for the extra crushing strength. So pretty tasty. And now the Ratkin. So Spearman, Blight, Ensnare is really annoying. Scurriers, they're more of a missile unit by the looks of it. They've swapped their throwing weapons for light crossbows. Brutes, like your ogres kind of unit. Vermintide, height 0, so they're like swarms pretty much. I'm not seeing any slaves. You normally see slaves in Ratkin lists. Interesting. It's average speed across the whole army. You could say it's consistent because almost everything is speed 6. There's one speed 7 there, which is just a monster, and there's one speed 5 unit. So there's no what you would call fast units, but overall the army is just relatively fast anyway, especially if it comes up against, let's say, dwarves. But this one is the army that's certainly lacking speed out of all of them we've seen so far. No super fast units in this army whatsoever. So what it will be relying on, I'm not sure. I've never seen this combo before. I mean, it looks pretty solid. All the units are fairly tasty in combat. I'm not seeing any hugely high nerve levels apart from this horde here of a high nerve. Nothing else looks ridiculously high. I suppose the demon spawn's quite high for a monster. Interesting. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Let's just pick one more and then we'll wrap this one up, I think, because we've been going over an hour. I'll give some overall thoughts after I've had a look. Which other army should I look at? There's got to be one that jumps out here that I can give some valuable insight on. Let's look at the Ogre army. Okay, because Ogres are pretty straightforward, should be easy to analyse. So we've got 2 warrior hordes. Pretty solid, of course. They're instantly comparable to trolls. They've got better melee stat. Less crushing strength, though. Siege breakers, they're the big crushing strength 3 guys in a horde as well. So wouldn't want to let those guys run into it. They're a little bit slower, though. Shooters, of course. Can't leave home without some shooter hordes, so 2 hordes of them. Let's see. Red Goblin Scouts. 4 units, 4 troops of Red Goblin Scouts. So they are basically flea bags. So for 100 points, I would imagine they're just going to be used as chaff units. 100 points each. So they're on the the more expensive end of just total chaff units, if you compare them to something like a troop of ghouls for 65 points, they're more expensive than that. Depends how you use them, I suppose. Interesting. If you can get flank charges with them, I suppose they're not bad at all, because they do have that thunderous charge. If you can get a flank charge in there with them, 14 attacks, that wouldn't be bad. And with that many of them, it's going to be difficult to deny flank charges to all of them. So maybe that's a plan he's got there. Warlord, Army Standard, Red Goblin, Bigot, 2 of those on flea bags as well, so they're going to be running around. So yeah, he's got 6 of these annoying, really fast goblin units that are going to be running amok. And then a small amount of ogre units. So that's going to be interesting, actually, because as you walk towards his shooters, you're going to be harassed by all these goblins, and then if you do get through that, maybe the goblins aren't going to even harass you. Maybe they'll just back off you and just let you advance until you get into range of the ogres, and then when the ogres hit you, these guys come in and just flank you to death. Interesting. This is another one I would really like to see in action. Very interesting. Lots of speed here, but it's speed found in weak units rather than the fast, powerful units that we've seen on some of the other armies. All these fast units are really feeble, should we say. But they're appropriately costed for that. Okay, so let's go back to obviously the winning list, which is mine. So how do I feel about my list now, having looked through some of the competition? Well, I like the amount of speed that I've got. I've got very few slow units. I've just got this slow skeleton warriors and zombie little block there, and the necromancer, who's also slow. Everything else is fast. I'm pleased with that. And when I say fast, I'm not even talking about speed 7 that some of the other armies are relying for their fast units. I'm talking 8, 9, and 10 across the board. So I think I've definitely got the speed edge on most of the armies I'll be facing at this tournament. And that gives me some confidence, but I have to actually use it wisely and not just fling myself into a brick wall of death. So if anyone has any questions or comments on any of that, then drop them in right now before I start wrapping this one up. At the moment, people are talking about, let's see, sleeping pills, their painting habits, talking about Bjorg, Bearman, Bjorg, Bearstruck, and the Bearman of Urslu, I think they were called. Someone mentioned them a minute ago. Right, let's stop the screen share right there, shall we? So you can look at, how did my hair get messed up during the course of that screen share? I don't think I even touched my head once. Anyway, my hair is starting to grow back quite magnificently now. It's not quite reached eye level yet. So yeah, it's getting back to its former glory, but it's not quite there yet. Okay, Mickey Jennifer says, you will be able to die quickly then, Andy. Yes, I would be able to die quicker than usual if I just march straight towards my enemy and get killed in turn 2 because I just went as fast as I can right in front of them. Let's see. Anyone else had anything to say on this in among the totally irrelevant chat that's clogging it all up? Let's scroll up a bit, shall we? Dreddy apparently ended up marrying the forest hobo. No, somebody else ended up marrying a forest hobo. Okay, that makes more sense. Apparently I had a wild party while off camera. Russell Higgins says turn 2 is a good time to die. I don't think it is. And this tournament, by the way, unlike the previous one I was at, will be using turn 7s, which means that my usual tactic of win the roll-off for first turn in every single game and then make my opponent go first might not be as good as usual. Because when there's no turn 7, knowing exactly when the game is going to end and guaranteeing that you have the last turn is a big advantage, I think. So I always let my opponent go first, generally, if I know that the game's ending on turn 6. Turn 7, that throws a cat amongst the pigeons, because you don't know when the game's going to end, so you don't know if you're going to have that last turn at that exact time. So when you're having what may be the last turn, you have to prepare for your enemy potentially striking back against you again. You're still guaranteed to get the last turn, you just don't know when it is, so it's not quite as big an advantage. So that's going to be interesting. If I win, I normally make my opponent go first regardless, because I'm always thinking of the scenario rather than killing. The scenario is always at the forefront of my mind. So as I look out across the table and see, well, there's an objective there, there, and there, I want to go last so I can leap on it, and then they're not going to have a chance to hit back against me when I make that leap. So it may be other people who prioritize just wiping the enemy off the table and then think about the scenario second. Maybe they would like to go first. It depends who you come up against, though. If my enemy has nothing but rock lobbers, then I might be foolish to let them go first, because I'm just giving them more time to shoot me. So if they've got nothing but artillery, nothing but 36-inch plus range shooting, maybe I just want to move halfway across the table in my first turn just to give me a chance of actually reaching them. It could be the difference between taking 3 rounds of shooting or 2 rounds of shooting, which can be quite significant. So there are times definitely when I would consider taking the first turn if I win the roll off. Okay, any other relevant comments? Andrew Gilbert, seems to be a lot of Kings of War tournaments in the UK, almost none in Berlin. Well, that's sad. Maybe you need to organise one. But I've heard Dreddy say a few times that there isn't much of a Kings of War community in Germany, or if there is, at least not in the Berlin area. Let's see. Anything else? Well, there was an interesting, slightly wargaming related piece of information that came out today. Nothing Kings of War related, but I saw on Facebook before that Total War Warhammer 2 was announced, so I'm sure I'm going to be talking about that at some point in the near future. I've had lots of video projects for that kind of in the works for a long time. When I was in the middle of doing a particular video project for that, then I had some issues with the old computer and had to reinstall Windows, and I still have to reinstall the game capturing software that I was using last time. So at some point I would like to do a full series of videos where I just completely play a campaign on Warhammer Total War and just video the entire thing and upload it. It would just be quite time consuming. I'm sure some people would like to watch that though. If anyone would like to see that, then let me know in the comments, by the way. Let's see. Yes, Dreddy confirming that no one that she knows plays Kings of War. Russell Higgins wishes me luck for this weekend, and I would say I could probably use it because the tournament last week, one game, I don't think I played that amazingly and I lost, but in one of the other games that I lost, there were some pretty horrendous moments of luck for me in that game. There were obviously other things I could have done differently, but I think if the rolling had been average, it could have been very, very different. Right, one quick final look at Facebook, see if anything popped up in the old Facebook group while I was broadcasting. Any urgent news or questions that came in? It doesn't look like it, so I believe it's time to start wrapping this one up. Any final comments? Get them in now. I've got my army packed up over on the table over there with the freshly painted wraiths that were painted with all the skill that's required to do this. Let me just grab the correct brush. And I'll use Cecil as an example model. If you can master this technique, then you can paint my wraiths. That is the level of skill that went into painting them. It was just total non-stop dry brushing. And progressive levels of dry brushing, though. And also, one thing I've found, when you're dry brushing, where is that varnish? I use this anti-shine varnish, which you have to apply by hand. And if you're using really, really dry brush, particularly white, right on the edges, this stuff can kind of absorb it and remove kind of the sharpest layer of a really, really dry brush because it's so dusty. It is almost like dusting the model. So there is that kind of dusty residue on it that makes up part of that highlight. And this stuff can actually eat some of it. So I actually applied another dry brush after the varnish just to make it a bit more visible. I've noticed on models where I apply a gloss varnish first, for example, this one, Citadel Ardcoat does not seem to eat the dry brushing quite so readily as the anti-shine varnish does. I don't know whether that's scientific fact or whether that's just a coincidence in my experience. Red hot tip of the week. And let's see, Russell Higgins, I think you're out of practice with the mostly dead army. Yes, I hadn't played much undead at all prior to the last tournament. And of course, in this one, I've completely changed the list to something that I've never touched before with a 10-foot barge pole. So all about the speed, and it's going to be quite a finesse army. So it might take me a few games to get into the swing of things. But there are 6 games in the tournament. So I'm hoping I'll be able to get at least a couple of wins and start to get a feel for how the army should be played, and then maybe tinker with it and then take it to another tournament as well. And then maybe I'll go back to goblins, or maybe I'll keep tinkering away with the fast undead. We'll see how it does. If I get completely steamrolled into the ground, that may completely change my outlook. Stu Rat, I usually use gloss and then a dull coat. Yes, if it's metal, I always do that. I always do 2 different layers of varnish, but for resin and plastic, I generally just use dull coat on its own. Okay, time to wrap this one up, folks. So let's just bring up this beautifully photoshopped image to close the show on. And as usual, I encourage everyone to check out all the various social media outlets in the description. All the various links down there are all very exciting, especially the Facebook group, where everyone should be a member to keep up with everything that I'm doing and all the exciting wargaming news that may pop up in there from time to time that people would like me to discuss. And let's see, when is there next going to be a video? Well, I'm going to be doing a tournament report probably on Monday, because it's a 2-day tournament, so I wouldn't want to do it when I get home on the Sunday, so I'll probably do that on Monday. And there probably won't be any other live shows next week apart from that. A couple of other things I'm working on. And then if there's nothing else that goes up next week, then I'll see you either on the Andy and Rem show on the following Tuesday, or I'll see you on the next 2D6 Friday on the following Friday in 2 weeks' time. So I'll definitely see you on Monday. Good night out there, whatever you are. And if you want to bribe anyone in the tournament to potentially rig their game against me so that I'm guaranteed to win, but to do it in a subtle manner, then feel free. I'm sure they will be receptive to any monetary offers. Good night.